Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have participants from various parts of the world, whether you're joining us live or later on. Thank you for being with us for another session of the Spiritism Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation, held every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It is my pleasure to host today's talk presented by Marcia Trajano, who will speak on the topic evolution and consciousness. Let's go give Marcia a warm welcome. And before we begin, allow me to briefly introduce her. Marcia Trajano is president and co-founder of the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living, dedicated to promoting Spiritism throughout virtual initiatives. She is co-host of the podcast Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, inspired by the teachings of Joanna de Angelis and developed in partnership with Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AME Brazil. With more than 25 years of involvement in the Spiritist movement in the United States, Marcia serves as a speaker and study group facilitator in both English and Portuguese. She holds a master's degree in technology management, is PMP certified, and works in the healthcare industry. Marcia, it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and get started. I was going to say, Peter, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and for hosting this session. And for everyone who's here today, I just would like to share a little bit about some reflections found in Joanna de Angelis' work around this topic, which is evolution and consciousness. And before we begin, let's just take a gentle breath and remember that we are here not to judge ourselves, but to understand ourselves. And let's go ahead and get started. Just have some visuals, no words in the slides. And wanted to talk about, when we talk about evolution consciousness, and let me just bring to you this, there's a chapter in this book, Times of Health and Consciousness, which is lovely. It's a 3-pager, folks, so 2.5 pages, but extremely inspiring or inspiration to me. But in any case, this topic, not so much evolution consciousness, but consciousness itself, is peppered throughout the psychological series by Joanna de Angelis. And if I were to say, where do you find, in addition to the book that I just shared, you can find it in The Integral Human Being, The Conscious Being, which is a really amazing book, Self-Discovery, Life Challenges and Solutions, and to another book, I don't believe it has been yet translated into English, but roughly we would say, or literally translated, it's called Personal Triumph. From the Spiritist perspective, I would say we start with the idea that we're not just biological beings, right? And from that perspective, it's this: are we this body, this biological organism that happens to possess consciousness, and that's how we distinguish ourselves from other beings? And we say no. From a Spiritist perspective, we are immortal spirits, and temporarily in this mortal coil, in this body that we are here in this incarnation, we express ourselves through our physical brain. We also express it through a psychological personality and the physical body. And this is important, again, because this is based on Joanna de Angelis' concept of consciousness, our time today. We need to see that she brings that question quite thoroughly And I love to hear from Peter, because he and I talked about a little bit on the issues of the physical brain and the personality in a different opportunity. But anyways, what are we here to talk about? Well, let's think about it. This is an invitation from Joanna de Angelis to, let's say, embrace, quote unquote, right, the destiny of every spirit, which is, in her words, is plenitude. Great book, by the way, by that title. That the sense of fulfillment, a full life, and with that sense of fulfillment, she also invites us to embrace consciousness. So plenitude and consciousness. And through her concept, she teaches us that spiritual evolution begins when consciousness awakens. So it's a really interesting paradigm from that. We are not awakened, consciously speaking, because we're humans, but as immortal spirits, our spiritual evolution really is kicked off, if you will, when we are awakened. And this is important in a topic to me because of what we're going through in, and I'm talking collectively, in the Western world and the Eastern societies. We are becoming quite distracted, not fully awakened. So anyways, no judgment here, but Joanna de Angelis reminds us that consciousness is that pathway through which our spirit advances toward that sense of fulfillment, plenitude, using her words. And what does this mean? It really means that each in every one of us, in our individual spiritual journeys, we don't begin when, say, oh, as a spiritist, I go to a spiritist center, or as someone who's interested in spirituality, in religiosity, I will read a book, even better, a sacred book, a considered sacred book. But it really begins when we awaken to a simple question: who am I, right? And I say this, and I think of that song by The Who, right? Who are you? Who am I? And we may want to say, prolonging to the same question, to who am I beyond my temporary circumstance, right? So I want to say that many of us actually can become quite anxious when we start talking about awakening, and even the word itself, it may get some existential crisis, or even some angst that we're not aware, because most of us have a feeling, oh, do you mean that now, as I flip the switch, as I wake up, I must suddenly become a, say, spiritually advanced being? And Joanna says, no, 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 it's quite the opposite, right? She says that awakening is simply the moment when we begin to notice ourselves, when we begin to notice this inner life with honesty, but also with kindness. So it's a really a beautiful shift in how we think about this sense of awakening. So uh, example that I like to reference, and this is, folks, for myself, right? When we think of a young child and we talk about, say, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months of age, and they start to crawl, and later on, at 1 year of age, maybe they start doing the first steps, and soon after, as a toddler, they learn to walk. Inherent in this beautiful, beautiful, amazing process that we can see. That's how maybe one of the most amazing athletes of the world. It doesn't matter, right? Marathon runner or a jumper or an amazing dancer. They all begin from the same origins, which is falling And as we fall, we learn to get up and do the next step. So, in simple terms, our falls do not mean we fail, right? They just simply mean, and metaphorically speaking, of course, that in this case, the process of walking has begun. So let's think about the process of wakening up begins when we start to notice this rich inner life with honesty and kindness. And I love it because we when we stop to reflect, and just the fact that we're here listening or thinking or pondering those issues, we start to see that um, as the child that falls and starts to walk, we too fall. We do too have emotional struggles, and those struggles do not mean that we are, say, spiritually lost, or we are dormant, or we are in a sleep state. They just prove that consciousness is starting, is kicking off. It's that the deeper consciousness is in the process of waking. And for me, when I think and I read and I study Joanna de Angelis, I often ask, what does it really mean to me? What does it mean to us? Well, in simple terms, I would think that we should reflect upon the fact that spiritual evolution, right, does not, and I mentioned that going to reading a book, but spiritual evolution does not begin when we say, I believe in God, or even if you not just out of the word, but you truly believe in God, or I practice a religion, or in a different aspect, I want to become a wise person, so I gather wisdom, I accumulate intellectual knowledge, for example. It is all about who we are, as I mentioned, and how I promote that sense of awakening within myself. In so many words, it's a transition from living with automatism, and this is a word, a concept that Joanna brings a lot, right? And I would say in our society today, those automatism are seen by our distracted mind, how automatically I go through the influence of all that we're immersed in, and it's a really multi-form, multi-channel ways for us to be immersed. We can talk about instincts, we can talk about conditionings, we talk about even impulses, but we move away from just living with those automatic responses to life as we know it into a different path of living intentionally, mindfully, deliberately, guided by my own self knowledge, my own sense of moral responsibility, our pursuits. And we can say, my pursuit is to really find myself, capital S, as Joanna puts, which is my psyche, my spirit, right? So, from that perspective, we start to understand that the spirit, we, all of us, as collectively speaking, right? The spirit is created simple and ignorant. What we mean by that, with the words by Allan Kardec, is simply put that in our simplicity at the beginning of a journey, we don't hold any awareness, but we also don't hold any knowledge, intelligence. We are ignorant, equal, pure, naive, innocent, right? And whenever I think about those words, I think about Adam and Eve, right? In the Garden of Eden, innocent, ignorant, simple. But we are given this beautiful opportunity to gradually evolve, and we do that through successive incarnations. Joanna, however, she comes to to deepen this teaching, right? We are created simple and ignorant to give us this lens of spiritual psychology, or so many people call it depth psychology, right? When she emphasizes that true evolution occurs when we become consciously engaged in the process of our inner transformation. And I say this, and immediately I think about what do you mean by not being consciously engaged in the process of inner transformation, right? Does it mean that I don't evolve? No, of course we all do. We are fated to evolve, but that as she calls true evolution, that very intentional evolution, that evolution through the pace that we desire, happens when we're consciously engaged in this process. And if we think about it, we can further ask ourselves, well, what do you mean by this process? What does it look like, for example? If consciousness is, say, much more than my ability to think, to as a processor, my brain, it is really the capacity to perceive myself back again to that idea of I am an immortal spirit. Then at a minimum, I need to recognize my psychological mechanisms. So again, instead of living a life that is, say, expressed by reactions rather than choice, or by, and we all go through this, right? By repeating, say, emotional patterns, and those patterns can be either inherited from many environmental factors, my family, the expectations, society, all the aspects of this life, my where I was born, where I was educated, where do I work, so on and so forth, but also what do I inherit from myself, meaning our prior existence, our prior incarnations. And then the other aspect that it's important for us again to reflect is another example could be how I remain a prisoner of my fears, or in a different aspect, my resentments, my arrogance, pride, guilt, and of course attachments to things, to people, to philosophies, for ideologies, so on and so forth. And Joanna tells us, instead of living that life, very reactionary, if you're not reactionary, it's not a good word, the reacting to things, we choose to then awaken, um, and we can do this by simply asking questions such as, I started already by saying, who am I? But perhaps, why do I suffer? What are the lessons hidden, perhaps, within my struggles, my challenges, my difficulties? What do I need to learn? What is the purpose of my existence? How can I become a better person? And those are all loaded questions, but those are mechanisms that will help us keep moving, be engaged, be very aware. And I would say those are the very first steps, perhaps, toward our self awareness, because every experience that we go through has indeed an educational purpose. And so when we engage in this journey of self awareness, we start to accept that, for example, and we live in a world of trials and expiations, and so we start to understand those trials are not punishments, but they are opportunities for all of us. That another aspect would be that all of our relationships, and we have so many conflicts whenever you put two people in the same bubble, if you will. you start to have different ways of seeing the same event, the same aspect, the same desires and ideas and plans. So each and every relationship become a classroom, right? And we're talking not just one to one, but one to many. And when we talk about those relationships, this is when we look at those very challenging, those people that are like, oh no, I'm gonna have to work with so and so. I just find that person so difficult. Those are your best teachers. And so all that we call pain, they become the catapult, the catalyst for this sense of awakening that we're talking here. Um, Progress is inevitable. It's actually a divine law. But Joanna de Angelis tells us that conscious progress is a very rich aspect of our lives. And so Joanna is here through me, urging all of us to stop merely experiencing life passively. So let's think about, we are immortal spirits. We can indeed reincarnate many times. We can repeat the same existential conflicts that we go through time after time, life after life, until we are ready to awaken to the lesson that is hidden with each and every one of those conflicts. But let us reflect, right? Evolution should never be measured by the number of, say, incarnation, but by the quality of the consciousness that is developed during each one of them. It's a lot. So from that perspective, I just wanted to say that it's important for us that once we understand consciousness is all about this moment of awakening, uh, we can also reflect within ourselves. Okay, if I am awakening, so what, right? What do I do with this new awareness? And this brings us to what I think is one of the most beautiful principle of free will, right? So when we talk now about evolution and consciousness, the concept of free will is quite inherent into those reflections, and it's super, super important to clarify here that free will is not just freedom to do whatever we want, but free will, and I call it, those are my term, right? It is a sacred ability, capacity to choose. And from that perspective, it's not just I'm going to drink coffee, right? I'm here bringing my coffee mug to you, to the viewers, but it's I choose to drink coffee, but it's also about what attitude do I have? What is the realm of my responses when an external event, something happens to me? How do I go about responding to the said event? My choice of thoughts, my choice of values that I nurture. So from this perspective, it is all important for all of us to understand that when Joanna de Angelis explains that freedom and responsibility are inseparable, right? And what she means by that is that the more conscious we become, the more responsible we are, and that responsibility lies in our inner world. She strongly recommends us to be aware of this responsibility, and this is, of course, is a spiritist concept, but it really means not. So I'm counter what I'm saying. It means, it does not mean that we are free from conflicts or challenges or even suffering, but it means that my life with free will be influenced, if you think about it, by my upbringing, by trauma sometimes, by the society that I belong, by my biology, by my surrounding environments, and how they are impacted by the spiritual influence. But none of that life really eliminate my capacity to choose, right? So an example that I like to think about it, let's think of two people, right? Me and my neighbor, we are both caught in the same storm, right? And neither one of us created the storm. We are not responsible or part of the root cause of that storm, but each one of us can choose whether, say, seek shelter or ask for help or even continue to do whatever we're doing despite this terrible storm. So from that perspective, that's a very simple way to say that free will operates within life's reality, not outside of them. But one person of the two grows quite wiser and can choose to be compassionate, as in, there is a storm, let me see who else is here, how can I be a mechanism to help the other, or the other can be, oh, right, I'm just upset because every time I try to get out and I get wet, my clothes are wet, my shoes is wet, and I cannot go on life as I intended. So one event for both, but responses are quite different. And what I'd like to call to our attention is not so much the response, seek shelter perhaps, or get an umbrella, continue to walk. Those are transactional, if you will, types of response, but to how in our inner world we respond to that. Hey, let me look who else is here, versus, oh, I'm tired of this weather where I live. So Joanna beautifully says, right? You shall become what you think and what you plan. And it's just beautiful statement. And if we think uh, Carl Gustav Jung, that Joanna often references him, he looked at this inner freedom, free will, as a process of becoming conscious. So it's very interesting how those concepts get together. The more unconscious I remain, the more automatic my behavior will be. The more I will repeat those old patterns, the more likely I am to believe that I'm just a victim. Every time I open the door, there's a storm, right? But the other aspect of it is the more conscious I become, the greater my capacity to choose. And that's where the free will comes in, to choose what to do. And this is a phrase that Jung famously said, right? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you call it fate. So think about it. Our thoughts create emotional response, but most importantly, they create emotional tendencies. My emotions will sustain certain behaviors, and my behaviors will become habits. My habits shape my character, and character will influence my destiny. So the question for all of us is, what am I, cultivating, if you will, within my daily existence? How do I get up? What do I do? What do I think? How do I choose? So let's just keep going from that perspective, because the when we talk about thoughts, right, and there is a very interesting confluence of authors, Spiritist authors. So Joanna, Emmanuel, Andrea Louise, for example, they all teach us about how thought is a creative force, And interesting enough, when we start thinking about, and I'm not in the field, I'm just read a little bit about it, but neuroscience today confirms, right, those repetitive thoughts strengthen neural pathways. I'm working with that that concept. So for professionally speaking, so it's just really interesting how it all comes together, because we can become quite frightened, if we're honest, and even startled with this idea. Do you mean, Marcia, Joanna, Emmanuel, Andrea, Luis, and neuroscientists out there, that if thought, right, is a creative, it has a creative power, does it mean that every negative thought I have will harm me? Fair question. And we just have to say that's not what Spiritism teaches us, right? Let's think about it. If I have a passing negative thought, let's think about a cloud crossing the sky, right? It doesn't make the sky gray permanently. It may temporarily dull the brightness of the sun. But what shapes us is the thought that we keep, and the word that comes to mind is cultivate, right? What we keep nourishing, cultivating. Um, and we do that, repeatedly, intentionally. And those are the ones that we need to watch out for. So we do not need to fear for ourselves, our minds, but we need instead to have a conscious decision to educate our minds, right? When we have a chance today, I would like to invite all of us alone in silence to take a second to ask ourselves, what thought have I repeated most often this week? Right? And it's a simple exercise. And then whatever the thought may be, right? And no judgment, positive or negative, just what that thought that keeps coming over, we can then perhaps add a reflection just for the visual appeal of it. If that thought became a garden, what kind of flowers would I be growing there? Right? I would love to think that my garden, those flowers blooming from my persistent thoughts, are bright or colorful. They smell good. It remains to see, right? But this is just an interesting exercise that I'm pushing out to you, all of us, to perhaps do it on your own. But in any ways, it's interesting for me to see that Joanna de Angelis aligns really well with those other authors regarding the power of thought. And just for us, Joanna, Emmanuel, and Andre Luis, we learn many things about the power of thought, but specifically that thought is not abstract. Thought is energy, and there is a creative power of thought. So, specifically, again, whenever we keep repeating within ourselves, we're strengthening those internal pathways that neuroscientists are talking about. And what do we mean by that? Well, let's think about modern neuroscience shows that many behaviors that we have are automatic. Right? We wake up, and this is interesting. Long ago and far away, um, I worked for almost 10 years at a place, and then I changed jobs in the same vicinity. This is when I lived in Atlanta, the same vicinity. And often, more than once for sure, I would find myself in my old job. And I'm like, oh, what am I thinking? I don't even know how I got here, quite frankly. It was so automatic, my getting up and driving, that I was not intentionally going to a different address, a different place. So all of you know this is long ago, before GPS, before all of those mechanisms that help us stay on track. But this is just an example of how many behaviors are indeed very automatic, and more than behaviors, how do our emotions condition our reactions to things that happen to us. And most important, and this is with quite a strong dose of compassion that we need to think about it, how do traumatic experiences will influence, will even direct some of our decisions, right? I could talk about something that happened to me not so long ago with a very, very dear person in my life. He disincarnated, he moved on, and a lot of things into what I felt was just grieving, but it felt like a traumatic experience influenced certain other responses to completely unrelated aspects. And this is just a simple thing that I'm talking about, not simple, difficult for me, but simple thing. And if you start to populate all the different traumatic experience that we may go through, we need to be aware of how much they influence our decisions. And it's important from modern neuroscience to understand that. But the flip side about it is, and it's always good for us to think about point counterpoint, is the fact that our brains possess neuroplasticity. So it just means that, yes, I have a behavior, yes, I have a certain habit, but due to my the plasticity, neuroplasticity in our brains, my habits can be transformed, my emotional patterns can change, and I can make new choices and hence create new neural pathways. And that is quite beautifully aligned with our spiritist understanding of our spiritual and moral renewal, which is all about how through my conscious effort, my self knowledge, my discipline, my perseverance, for example, I can reshape my mind, my character, my emotions. I would say Spiritist teachings were a little bit ahead of the curve of the current research, but if you think about it, just to frame that, Emmanuel taught long ago to us that the mind is the mirror of life. Andre Luis also explained how thought modes our emotions. He taught us so much about our nervous system, energetic fields, and even he talks about the perispirit, the spiritual body, right? And from Joanna, which is the focus of our discussion today, she reminds us that from our mind and our feelings, all of our values are cultivated, which really means that our inner life continually shapes our external experience. We could spend hours talking about it, but this is so important for all of us to reflect upon and to think about it. Our inner life shapes our external experience. So negative thoughts, especially if they're repetitive in our day to day, week to week, year to year, they will generate, for example, emotional exhaustion. They will condition how we perceive our lives to be, and I say that because Joanna de Angelis is a huge proponent of gratitude. Right, her book, The Psychology of, I believe, is The Psychology of Gratitude, is beautiful, and they really discuss the many aspects of how we perceive reality, and as we don't consciously manage or monitor those thoughts in terms of positive versus grateful positive thoughts, they can become patterns of behavior. And I know we all know this, but we all should be reminded as much as possible that our mental vigilance, our mental monitoring of our thoughts is truly essential. And so for me, and Joanna tells us almost in every book, every chapter of her books, but she reminds us as well that prayer, self-awareness, self-observation, emotional discipline, reflections, meditation, and inner transformation or inner reform are really important, because they're not just a religious practice or even recommendation. They are, in essence, psychological and spiritual tools for our freedom, because our mind never stops. Thinking and thought is power, and we're always creating ideas through our imagination, etc. So think about it. Our thoughts do not remain in our minds. They influence our emotions, our body, and our sense of well-being, which leads us naturally, and I'm getting close to the end of our talk today, but to the relationship between health, suffering, and inner balance. Joanna says, and this is really important for us to stop, right? Our natural state is health. And this does not mean that, say, illness, I'm sick, I'm ill, I have this terminal disease, whatever, is a punishment, or even that spiritually evolved people never become ill. Do not fall into that trap. It just means that harmony, peace, balance are the original state of the spirit, all of us. And on one hand, suffering is not divine rejection, right? Which is really important. It's quite comforting from a spiritist perspective, is that if I am in pain, if I am suffering, it does not mean God abandoned me. It just means that that moment of pain and suffering may be, it often is, a consequence of some past choices, or it could be a learning opportunity. It can be a test, right, of how resilient we have become, or a path to awaken in me a sense of compassion. In every case, divine love, the love of God, remains present. We're never abandoned. And a good friend of mine gave this example not so long ago, so I'd love to repeat it as we're getting close to the end of our reflections today, but it helped me visualize quite well. So she said, when a seed is buried, right? So you get a seed, you buy in a little packet, it's quite clean and pretty, and you put in, you bury in dirt, and let's quote unquote, the seed experience, I'm doing air quotes here, experience darkness before it can materialize its potential, which is becoming a tree in that case. So from that standpoint, the darkness of being buried in the dirt is not the end. It is part of a transformation. So let's think about it, right? Many of us carry incredibly large but invisible struggle. And it's important to note that Joanna de Angelis reminds us that awareness, prayer, self-observation, and love will help us restore a sense of inner balance, equilibrium, or peace. So to me, Joanne is talking about it a lot, in fact, but she brings a deeply compassionate view of my suffering. So illness, not a punishment. It is just an example that I'm not in balance. And when she said our natural state is health, she does not mean either. I mentioned that if I am a spiritually evolved or mature person, I will never suffer. But she is telling us, in fact, that if I am seeking and I reached a sense of harmony and peace, equilibrium, right, I will very much not entertain negative emotions. So when I feel hatred, resentment, guilt, she talks a lot about guilt, chronic fear, despair, those are the root cause for a lot of internal feelings and lack of balance. So today, again, if we look into the connection in of what we're saying here in modern science, we know, and it's been documented, that our emotions will affect our immune system, our hormones, propensity for inflammation, and even neurological functioning. So Joanna brings us again and again that the sense of integration between health and well-being and our spirituality. So let us switch our vigilance on so that we can look at our thoughts and look at what we are thinking, how we're behaving, what we're feeling, and through that we can get back to our natural state, right? How do we do this? Observe yourself, observe myself, notice excesses, right? For example, positive or negative depending on our cultural lens. But if I have a propensity for becoming sad, and is the excess leading to depression? Is the excess of depression leading to pathological depression? Just think about it, do something to it. Or the other way around, I'm happy and then I become euphoric, and there are certain things that can also lead at this other side of the spectrum to an excess, emotional excess. So let us just interrupt if there is a mental cycle that can be potentially destructive, so that we will get control. So healing two begins with awareness, and I just want us to think about it. When we reflect about consciousness, we talk about free will, we talk about our responsibility, our thoughts, and healing. We arrive to a question that gives us meaning to all others. What is the ultimate direction of evolution? And Joanna answers with a single word: love. So with that, I think I am at time, and I'd love to come back to our Q&A session.
Well, thank you, Marcia, for your insightful reflections. And please stay with us for the Q&A session, which will begin shortly after a few announcements. 1. Register now for the 20th U.S. Spiritist Symposium, hosted by the United States Spiritist Federation. The event will take place on November 7th at the AC Hotel Fort Lauderdale Airport in Diana Beach, Florida. This year's theme is The Compass for Spiritual Progress. For registration and more information about the talks and speakers, please visit spiritistsymposium.org. Number 2, we cordially invite you to the 19th Spiritist Conference of Georgia on October 11th and 12th. This year's theme is The Spiritist View of Afflictions. Lectures will be in English and in Portuguese with simultaneous interpretation. A discounted registration will be offered through August 31st. Visit spiritistconference.com or use the display QR code for details and registrations. We invite you to follow us on our social media channels to stay updated on upcoming events and activities. And number 4, don't forget to visit the USSF bookstore at spiritistbooks.us, where you'll find a wide selection of Spiritist books including several exciting new releases. And next, if you work with Spiritist youth or are interested in educational resources, be sure to explore the Family, Youth, and Children's Spiritist Education, otherwise known as FIXIE, at the website at spiritismkids.us, where you'll discover excellent materials and ideas for youth educators. And finally, take a moment to check out the Be My Hope app, which offers inspiring daily messages to uplift your spirit. It's available for free on both the App Store or Google Play. Okay, let's turn our attention to your comments and questions. If you would like to send in a question using the chat window, there's still time to do so, so please feel free to share your thoughts. Okay, let us see what we got, Marcia.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. Question from Glossio Pessoa. Hi, Glossio. How are you? Thank you for the amazing lecture, Marcia. Why do we allow our negative thoughts to sabotage our best plans and intentions?
So we talked about this before, right, Peter, at a different place, which is long ago, maybe 2-3 years ago. We talked about two really interesting books, and I call them bookends, right, where one talks about empty life and the other one is full life. I don't know if you're going, your mind is going to where I'm going, Peter. But the question from Glaucio, and hi Glaucio, why do we allow our negative thoughts sabotage our best plans and intention? And we should really go back to the sense of conditioning. Number one, and we talk today more in terms of self-awareness and consciousness, to be able to be in a position to resist our negative thoughts, to sabotage what we want to do, to quote Glaucio. But it's a question of how prevalent our society is becoming in what Joanna calls conditionings on you need to do this and you need to look like that and you need to have a certain behavior. Those conditionings are, or what Jung would call the demands of our external world, are placed on us in a way that it becomes dizzying, right? And I say dizzying because we do the best, and we do that to ourselves and to our children, our friends, to be able to better be equipped to meet those demands. And those demands, by the way, will change generationally speaking. They will change in the what we call the zeitgeist of the time, right? The spirit of the time. If I was born in, say, in the 1930s, right, post-depression, it would be a very different way to meet those external demands than post-World War, and today, post the beginning of the phenomenon called social media. But from that, we have the shifting and increasingly demanding expectation that is mostly, and I'm not judging social media. It's a wonderful aspect of our lives today, but because it is mostly a visual, right? And I'm talking about with my hand up, pretend this was my mobile device, and mostly we are snippets of visual, and it's our brain are just so fast that it's dizzying from that aspect. But we, with that amazing the multitude of impulses to what we should do and look like and behave like, we become more and more distant. And I put in my hands distancing from one another, from what we are, our essence. So Glaucio, I would say this is why we sabotage, is when we don't look at ourselves. And by the way, it is not easy at all to look at ourselves and really finding what is the essence? And I love to quote The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, because in that little, what most people think of as a child's book, he starts with that idea. When you ask who you are, people will tell what they do. Well, Joanna goes even further to that, right? We distance who we are, the essence, into what we do. And there's another movement, especially related to our very capitalist, consumerist society, into not what I do necessarily, but what do I have? And finally, and I look at you, Peter, because we talked about this before, right? To what I seem to be. It's an illusion, a curated form of showing who I am. And why am I talking all about it when the question was, why do I sabotage myself? Is because in addition to all of this, which is the plants may be, Glaucio, a fabrication of the demands of the external world, that's the plan. There's something else really interesting, that between that separation of what you look like, what you have, what you do, and what you are, from the essence of who we are, which is, as again, immortal spirit. And that essence also has a vocation, a talent, or in so many words, a reincarnatory plan, that this is the most important thing for us to do. And often, what we are here to do really has nothing to do with what that the time that we live in will most likely say, this is what you need to do. You need to be a certain height, a certain hair color, a certain behavior, a certain body. That's the latest in the past year or so, right? I was, Peter, in a professional discussion not so long ago, and they talked about how um, Ozempic and all the pills and all the amazing recent discovery of um, science today is reshaping an entire society, right? Not good or bad. It's this new something, and the impacts are starting to be seen from dentists to restaurants to the shelves in the supermarket. It's shaping an entire new generation just with this new innovative medical aspect here. But I think I talked too much. Sorry, Peter. Do you want to add anything to that? Because I know we had fantastic conversations about this topic
Yeah.
before.
Well, what I was thinking as you were talking is, and in reference to Glaucio's question,
Yeah.
perhaps our if we have a distorted understanding of our relationship with the material, that can be
Yes.
a reason for why we tend to sabotage ourselves.
I love very, very, very crisp
Mm,
answer, right? The
mhm,
distorted
yeah,
view. And I would add to what you call that distorted view of our material lives. It's really important to think about
mhm,
those attachments, or too strong of an attachment to things, go beyond
mhm,
to things. It's bigger than that. It is ideologies. And those ideologies
mhm,
can be
mhm,
philosophical, religious, political, even, and we're about to end the 2026 World Cup, right? It could even be it's my team versus this. So all of those things that play, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be passionate about anything, but it could play a distorted aspect of our attachments to our lives.
mhm. Well, the 20th century was full of conflicts because of ideology.
Yes,
You
absolutely.
made a lot of good points. Okay, next question. Um, from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Why does developing our consciousness matter? What happens if we don't?
Oh, this is a good question. What happens if we don't? It does not matter that if we don't, because we will. right? So it's an ambiguous way to answer the question. Consciousness is our birthright. And when we study Joanna de Angelis and many related authors, we start to see not just the word consciousness, but cosmic consciousness. This expansion of our consciousness is where we are fated as we evolve as immortal spirits. So what she's talking about, Joanna, and I alluded to earlier in my reflections today, everyone, was the fact that when we engage in a very purposeful, very intentional way, that we engage in our self-awareness, then that attainment of our conscious expansion becomes much faster. So it's almost like an accelerated view of the process that is natural. I say this because long ago and far away, I used to facilitate a study group on such a topic, and the whole idea, until I met Joanna de Angelis in the psychological series, until then it was very formulaic. You have to do this, and what do we mean by that? And I'm going to be cliche here, but I'm going to do it anyways. Let's shift into cliche, but not judgmental. But let's say, oh, you cannot dance. And I say this because I know you're a dancer, Peter, right? We cannot dance because dancing is bad, reflecting on Footloose and Kevin Bacon and all that, right? And if you don't dance, you're not gonna. If you dance, you're not gonna become this or that. And it's just like, it's not about the blocking behaviors. We will get to that sense of pure spirit, all of us, but we're far from it. And it's a choice. Free will, remember we talked about it? It is really how we go about managing our lives, our choices, our thoughts, our emotional response to life. All of it become part of, to me, is this puzzle, right? Many different puzzle pieces for the same attainment, which is consciousness. I hope this helps.
Yeah, those are some great answers and reflections. Okay, next question. This is from the International Spiritist Council.
Mhm.
How can we study Joanna de Angelis's contributions to psychology while ensuring that Spiritism remains the doctrinal foundation rather than treating her works as an independent psychological system?
I love the question. So thank you, TVC, and whoever wrote that, because this is really critical, folks. If there's no other question, let's stay with this one. I cannot, and I'm going to go away from the psychology first and go to another one, another block of contributions. If we study Spiritism and we don't study the historical contributions of Jesus, it's not full. It is an orphaned way to be able to understand spiritism. So it has to be coupled. And Joanna is very close to the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Allan Kardec through in Spiritism, as well as others. Earlier, I mentioned when we talk about thought, how well connected, how well aligned her teachings are to Andre Luis and Emmanuel, for example. This is just a quick example. That universality of the teachings is really key. Now, the question was about Joanna de Angelis' contributions to psychology. Her contributions to psychology is actually bringing spiritist to the psychology, not bringing psychology to spiritism. So, in doing so, she really has opened the field for those who are either students or teachers of psychology to look at a much deeper and deeper view, because they're including now the spiritual elements to psychology. as I say that, and I don't know what's what's behind the question, but we see a beautiful and strong movement, globally speaking, but mostly in Brazil, of bringing, for us to understand Joanna de Angelis, she speaks spiritual psychology, right? So for me to understand spiritual psychology as a spiritist, maybe, just maybe, I need to understand a bit of psychology. So there's a lot of really amazing people giving us the understand, say, real low level here, but what is a shadow? What is an archetype? What are those definitions that are really the bread and bread, butter and bread of, if I am a psychologist, but if I am trying to understand spiritual psychologies, and I need to make sure that I do the bridge between my spiritual knowledge to that. So to answer the question is, for me to study the contributions of psychology, I must go to Jesus. I must go to Christianity. I also must go to Spiritism. Otherwise, it will be a one-legged stool of those contributions.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia. These are great reflections and things to think about. And thank you, a heartfelt thanks to everyone who joined us for today's live talk and to those who regularly follow our weekly Spiritism Talk series. Your continued engagement is truly appreciated. We invite you to join us next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for our next live session where Gisada Korngold will be exploring the topic Bartimaeus and Zacchaeus, a journey through Jericho. We look forward to having you with us. Marcia, before we close, could you please share your final remarks and then lead us?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I just want to say, before we close, that I call myself a student of Joanna de Angelis, and the reflections that I would leave with all of us is this message of hope, right? We are not finished, wrapped up, complete, perfect beings. We are beings in progress, in transformation. So every effort that we have toward our self-awareness, every kind, every act of kindness, I mean, every moment that we are able to forgive, every prayer that we may be able to utter, every conscious thought that we have of peace is a step toward that true awakening of our consciousness. So let us leave today maybe with a sense of serenity, but also responsibility, because it's not a passive, let's life take me. It will take you, but let's take me where I really want to go. But with that, I would love for us to maybe, if you're in a position, to close our eyes in gratitude to Joanna de Angelis and her teachings, as a mentor of Divaldo Franco for his disciplined approach to all the work that he's done, but in particular to psychographing her works, to the efforts of so many organizations, including this one, the U.S. Spiritist Federation, to bring to us the conduit, the platform to learn more. We ask for the blessings for all of us to learn, to accept, to forgive, but most importantly, to be able to love. So be it.